Well, morning, Lakeside, and I got a question for you. Have you ever had such a bad experience with someone that you just uttered the words? Maybe you said it out loud, maybe under your breath, maybe you sent it a text to a friend as you were processing how bad it was, but you're like, they are like the devil incarnate. They're like Satan himself. That's how bad they are. Have you ever had that moment? Jesus did. Yep. One time, Jesus was talking to not someone he hated, not one of his enemies. In fact, seemed to love everybody, but he was talking to one of his close friends. And in fact, it wasn't that his friend did something horrible. His friend simply shared an opinion that Jesus didn't agree with, and Jesus calls him Satan. Maybe you've read that passage before. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you're a teenager. Your parents just dragged you out of bed, and you're kind of like waking up, and you're like, wait, Jesus called someone Satan? My parents always tell me I should be more like Jesus. What? Now that I've totally tantalized you with a whole bunch of facts taken completely out of context, would you turn with me to Matthew chapter 16, verse 13. Matthew 16:13, and that's where we're gonna pick up the story and find out the actual context of what's actually going on and the opinion that was shared with Jesus that resulted in him saying that and what Jesus actually meant by it. So while you're doing that, let me introduce where we are today, part 4 of our series called Open, and it's all about community and how community is not something we necessarily find, stumble upon, get the right app, and then we have community. It's something that no matter how many people you're surrounded by, if we don't open ourselves to community, we're never gonna have it. And as Jesus people, this is mission critical to who we are. So we wanna learn in this series, how do we continue to open ourselves to community and open ourselves to others so they can experience community as well. And today we're gonna cover one thing that will help you in any type of relationship grow that type of community a little bit more. One thing, it's gonna be really, really helpful. And I just gotta say this up front, okay? For the analytical types, you know who you are, okay? You're gonna be listening to this message, you're like, okay, that's interesting, and I didn't see that one coming, okay. And you're gonna kind of like see this roller coaster ride, and you're gonna be like 80% of the way through the message, and you're gonna be like, I have no idea what this has to do with community. That's okay. Don't worry, the last 20%, I promise I'm gonna tie it all together. I haven't gotten lost, okay? So I just need to warn you because I know the analytical types are totally gonna be like, where's he going? The others of you, the non-analytical types, you know who you are. You're just along for the ride anyway, so don't worry, just enjoy it, okay? But as we jump into it, just wanna also let you know, we're gonna do Q&A. Daniel and I are gonna do Q&A, or as we like to say, Q&R, question and response. You ask a question, we're gonna respond. I don't know if we'll answer your question or not, but we'll try our best. So feel free on whatever platform you're engaging with us, whether that's the website, you can just throw up a question in the comment section, Facebook, or that number that was on the screen before, you can text us, and that way the whole rest of everyone watching doesn't see your question. It's a bit more confidential that way. Daniel will get them all, and at the end of the message, we'll take a few of those questions and talk about them a little bit. So with that said, Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, and for those of you who maybe you're new to Bible reading or don't have a Bible yourself, it'll be on the screen for you, but let me just read it for you, okay? So, 16:13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? The Son of Man is the way he referred to himself, and so he's saying like, who do people say that I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He's like, there's lots of ideas of who you are. But what about you, he asked his disciples. Who do you say that I am? And I love Simon Peter. He reminds me of myself, very impulsive. And he just jumps in, he's like, I know the answer, Jesus. He's like, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. He's like, not only are you right, but you had no way of knowing that unless the supernatural intervened, unless God actually put that on your mind or spoke to you. Just this really neat moment, right? And so Peter all of a sudden is just feeling like, wow, okay, I'm not crazy. I was really sensing that, and I shared it, and I was right. And he says this, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock, speaking of Peter, he's giving him this nickname. He's like, you're like the rock. I will build my church, which is a fancy word, not for building. It was a word that simply meant my gathering, my people. So I will build my gathering, my community, my people on you, Peter. You're the start of this community that I'm here to start. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. No matter how hard it gets, as Jeff kind of said, the battles may come. He's like, but nothing will overcome the plan I have for my community. So remember that, okay? So Peter just had this amazing moment. God's like, yes, you're blessed. You heard from God. You're right. And I'm going to build my community on you. I'm just so excited for you, Peter, okay? Then we fast forward to verse 21. So go ahead to verse 21. And then Jesus kind of shifts gears a little bit and starts to talk about something different. He says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Okay, so Jesus is like, by the way, guys, I just need to tell you some of the future plans. We've been together for 3 years now. I'm actually going to Jerusalem, and things are going to get really messy, and I'm actually going to be killed, and 3 days later, I will rise. Okay, now, raised from the dead. And so you need to understand how uncomfortable that was and how it went against everything people believed about the coming Messiah. People were expecting a warrior. They were expecting a king. They were expecting someone to ride into battle, to drive out the Romans, and to win. In that world, like people saw the divine, people saw the gods as always winning. And so Peter has this amazing moment. He's like, you're the Son of God. And it's like, yes. And then like a few sentences later, Jesus is like, by the way, I'm going to die. It's like, wait, what happened to the Son of God part? Like, I thought, like, you can't, how does that, like, they were not computing this, right? But Jesus is explaining to them, like, guys, I operate differently than your view of how the divine, how the gods interact with the world. I win people over with love, not violence. So instead of taking life, I'm giving mine, and I'm gonna die. Now, hindsight's 2020, and we understand what's happening here, but in the moment, they're totally confused. But we understand that Jesus had to die. That's the message of the gospel, or what we call the good news. The message that God loves us so much, he writes himself into human history, models a perfect life, shows us how to live fully alive, and then gives his life in this divine, mysterious exchange so that we can have life. His sacrifice gives us life, and we can, if we choose to, join in relationship with him through faith, have relationship with Christ. Something we're so passionate about at Lakeside. We love to help people discover and fully follow Jesus. And if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, I would encourage you, reach out on our website or through that phone number. We'd love to have a pastor follow up with you and talk to you about a relationship with Jesus. But it's something that we're so incredibly passionate about. But remember, that's hindsight. But in the moment, Peter and the disciples, they're freaking out. They're all shocked. And so Peter all of a sudden just kind of calls Jesus over. And this is what we read next. Verse 22. Peter took him aside. So it's almost like Peter's like, Jesus, can I talk to you for a minute? Like, can we just go over there? Like, takes him aside and says to him, in fact, rebukes him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Which is really interesting, the word rebuke. Because Jesus rebuked a few things in his day, right? He rebuked storms. He rebuked demons. He rebuked racism, ageism, but all of a sudden it's like Jesus shares a story or an opinion and Peter rebukes it. He's like, no, never, which did you catch the inner promise? Remember we talked about inner promises a few weeks ago? Never and always. Remember those statements, those kinds of statements always lock us into a certain type of future and we stop listening to the voice of God. So Peter's so locked into his idea of what the Messiah should be like. He's so culturally blinded, he's so theologically blinded that the moment Jesus tells him, the same Jesus who he just declared as the Son of God tells him something that he can't agree with. All of a sudden he's like, never, Lord, never, nope, and rebukes him. And then I love what Jesus does next. Jesus in verse 23, if you want to follow along. Jesus turned. It's almost like Peter grabbed Jesus and was like, let's go talk over here in the corner. And it's almost Jesus like, this is a group conversation I want to have. And so he kind of turns back to the group. Jesus turned and he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. I'm sorry, how did we get there, right? Like Peter often says dumb things, but like all of a sudden it's like, how do we get to the place where Jesus is calling him Satan? Like, I feel like, and you're kind of like, so like when I don't like someone's opinion, can I call them Satan? Jesus said it, that settles it, right? Like what do we do with that? Can I suggest to you that we have to understand the context? Okay, you have to understand that Jesus has lived 3 years with Peter and the other disciples, okay? And they didn't have Netflix. That meant every night when they got, back to the place where they were staying, they didn't just like binge watch another show and it's like, what are we watching tonight, friends? It's like they sat around a fire, they ate together, and they shared stories and they talked and they learned. And I'm telling you, when you spend 3 years with someone, some of you know this, you've had a roommate for a few years now, you have a friend, you have a spouse, and they start telling, it's like that one time in grade 8 and you're like, I know this one, right? It's like you just start to know your friends' stories. And there's no doubt in my mind, in 3 years, they definitely would have had moments where they're like, hey, Jesus, sitting around the fire. Jesus, tell us that story again. Tell us that story of that time where you were alone in the desert for 40 days and all of a sudden the devil showed up and started tempting you. Like that would have been a story that Jesus would have told them, right? It's like, and then the devil tried to take you off track and tried to sell you on all this glorious living, right? Like remember that? Like they would be aware of that. So my suggestion to you is not that Jesus is actually calling Peter the devil. He's recalling an old story. And he's almost like saying like, Peter, you're enacting the wrong character in the story. You're acting more like Satan this moment. Satan showed up at my weakest point and tried to push me in the wrong direction. And I'm telling you right now, I need to go and die. And you're trying to push me in another direction. I love the way that theologian R.T. France says it best. The same Peter who had just spoken, remember just a few verses before, just spoken what God had revealed to him, is now speaking for Satan. The same Peter who had just spoken what God had revealed to him is now speaking for Satan. Then Jesus continues, right? Get behind me, Satan. And look what he says to Peter. You're a stumbling block to me. It's like you're in my way. You're causing me to stumble. You're a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. It's like Jesus is saying, Peter, humans think differently than God on some issues. To which you might ask like, well, how so? And then the next part of the passage that we don't have a lot of time to go into all the verses, but it starts off and we get enough of a flavor of where it's going. Jesus says this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, almost explaining, or actually explaining how God and humans are different. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to follow Jesus, whoever wants to do it God's way, must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. Can I just suggest to you, first of all, when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, as Christians, we like to use that kind of language, like, don't have a car, got to ride the bus to work every day. It takes me twice as long, but that's my cross to bear. Maybe not the best use of that language. I think Jesus was quite literally speaking to some of his disciples who were literally going to live their lives and die for Jesus, many of them crucified on crosses. History shows us those stories. And so I think he was literally saying, like, if you're going to follow me, like some of you are actually going to end up dead. Okay, so maybe the language of us carrying our crosses, got to make sandwiches for the kids for tomorrow. Like, that's hard, I get that. But like, not carrying your cross, okay? But the idea of self-denial is very clearly there, okay? So it's almost like Jesus is juxtaposing the two different ways of doing it, God's ways and humans' ways. And here's how I'd summarize it. Self-denial is the way of Jesus. Self-preservation is human nature. Self-denial is the way of Jesus. Self-preservation is human nature. You know this. I know this, right? How many of you, the moment they announced there was a lockdown, found yourselves rushing over to the grocery store right away or woke up at like 6:30 in the morning to get there right when they opened at 7 o'clock? How many did that? Of course you did. Why? Self-preservation is just human nature. How many of you, as you were in line, looked backwards and saw all the people that came after you and then texted your friend or texted your spouse and saying, there's like 75 people behind me. I got here just in time, right? How many did? Why? Because self-preservation is how we are. How many of you, okay, here's one. How many of you looked back and asked this question the day before lockdown, okay? You're like, hey, is anybody behind me? This is actually like grocery day for you because my grocery day is 5 days away. I'm actually here just restocking my freezer and pantry. But if this is your actual grocery day, I mean, like you're not gonna have bread tomorrow if you don't get in. Can you just come in front? Nobody did that. Why? And I'm not judging you. I do the same thing, right? But like self-preservation is how humans act. And Jesus is saying, so there's a human way of acting and then there's a higher way, which is the God way, which is self-denial and self-sacrifice. Peter is in the same place. He's looking towards self-preservation. Jesus calls him out. He's like, you only have the way of humans in mind, not the way of God. I don't know what triggered Peter. Maybe it was the fear of losing his job. It's like, Jesus, if you die, I left my job. Like my resume doesn't look good. I've been wandering around for 3 years with some crazy rabbi, right? Like, doesn't look, right? Like maybe he's scared of his employment. Maybe he's scared of his family, right? Maybe he's like, then I'm gonna have to go back to family dinners and be like, I told you that crazy teacher, you shouldn't have followed him, right? Like maybe he's nervous about that. Maybe he's nervous about having to face the religious leaders without Jesus being there to say something brilliant and drop the mic and walk out and be like, yeah, I'm with him, right? Like maybe he's nervous about that. Maybe he's nervous about losing all the fame. When you're with the guy who can turn water into wine, you get invited to every party. I'm just saying, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe Maybe he just really liked Jesus and he didn't want to lose his friend, right? Whatever it is, Jesus is saying, Peter, you're speaking to me right now. You're giving me advice right now out of self-preservation. But the way of Jesus, and I'll just summarize it this way, the way of Jesus is moving from self-preservation to self-sacrifice. The way of Jesus is moving from self-preservation to self-sacrifice. Friends, God gives his life for us. We do the same for others. Now, some of you were like, okay, that sounds nice, but like nobody wants to live that way. Like that sounds awful, right? Like self-preservation, there's a reason it's good, it's human nature. Like it goes better that way. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but here's the thing that you just have to pause and think about. And if you're not a church person, not a Christian, you're kind of, journeying with us. We have a few people that I love hearing from who are just like, hey, I got questions. I'm trying to figure out this Jesus following thing. Like, here's the thing that you have to pause and ask yourself, okay? The reality is you can agree. You don't have to be a Jesus person to believe that self-preservation is kind of the human way. We all have it, okay? But let's just be honest for a second. Self-sacrifice is the thing that we find most attractive in others, isn't it? Like when you're looking for someone to date, you don't look for someone who only cares about self-preservation, but actually someone who's sacrificial. In fact, you go home to your family and you're like, I just met this person. They're so kind, they're so humble, they're so generous with their money, right? Like we look for people who are self-sacrificing. When you share a story at a funeral, you don't talk about how selfish someone was. You talk about the moments where they sacrificed of their life. It's a thing that we want to see in our children, right? We try and correct self-preservation behavior when they're fighting, and we want to lead them towards a way of self-sacrifice. And the thing I always tell people to pause and think about is, survival of the fittest teaches us self-preservation. So why is it innately in every single human being that we're drawn to self-sacrifice? I always say it's like breadcrumbs that our Creator left inside of us. As Genesis says, we are made in the image of God. So while human nature, while our flesh is always trying to protect ourselves, we're still drawn to self-sacrificing love, which is ultimately found in the person of Jesus, in the life, death, and resurrection of our Savior. That's interesting to me. You can wrestle with that. We did a whole message on it in our My Problem with God series, Tough Questions for God and the Existence of God. The way of Jesus is moving from self-preservation to self-sacrifice. Now, what does that have to do with community? I'll get there in a second, okay? But some of you are probably wondering, like, Mark, practically, how do we live this out? How do we move from self-preservation to self-sacrifice? I'm gonna suggest it's one simple question that will help you along this way. And it's simply this question: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? If Jesus embodied self-sacrificial love, and we follow Jesus, the question we should always be asking with every decision that we make is, what does love require of me? Let me give you an example, okay? I'll pick one from culture that's happening in the news right now. You probably see it on your news feed regularly. Christians have been in the news recently, if you've noticed, defying lockdowns, not wearing masks in church, writing angry letters to politicians. And I realize most Christians are doing some incredible things in this season, and yet that doesn't make your news feed, but this does, okay? And so let me just answer this question that often comes up to me. It's like, Mark, how do you feel about all these different ways in which Christians are fighting back against the government? And I want to just give a black and white answer, but I always say well, it depends. Like, what are we talking about? Because it's easy to swing to extremes, right? Like, how dare anyone question the government? Or we must, question and push back on the government. Those are the extremes. I always find Jesus usually doesn't live in the black and white. He's usually in the gray. And so let me just play it out this way, just for that example. I mean, I wish I could just open my Bible to the book of COVID, chapter 19, and get all the ideas of how to kind of, mass. Okay, as long as it's from a lamb that was perfect and not, whatever it is. It's like, no, hang on. It's like, what does love require of me? Let me give you two extreme examples. I know it's more nuanced, but this will help get the point across, okay? Example number one. Pastor writes angry letter to the premier. How dare you take away our right to meet? Don't you know the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? It is our right to meet. It's our God-given right to meet. We must meet, and if you don't let us meet, we will continue to meet. Okay, extreme example number one. Let's go extreme example number two. Pastor writes to the premier. Another one questioning the government. Excuse me, Mr. Premier. I'm a pastor. We're a church. And lockdown's been really hard. A lot of our people are lonely, at home. But today I'm not writing to you about our Sunday services. I'm actually writing to you about Tuesday nights. Tuesday nights we have an AA group that has used our building for years. And the leader of the AA group has reached out to me because while they've moved to online, about half of our AA group does not have access. They're impoverished people. They do not have access at home to the internet. And for some of these people, that meeting is more important than groceries. They won't live another week without that meeting. And so, Mr. Premier, I know you have a lot on your plate. You maybe didn't know about these people. I'm not, suggesting that you just overlooked them and didn't care, but I just beg you, can we have a conversation to see if there's a safe way to allow these people to meet? Because I really feel like this is a necessity for these people. That's interesting because both people are actually pushing back on government mandates. One of them feels very clearly like the way of Jesus, of self-sacrificing, laying down your own rights, but caring for others, the marginalized. And you say, Mark, it's more nuanced than that, and it's our right to critique the government, and we should, it's a democracy. Here's the point. I'm not responsible for you. I'm not responsible for that pastor or that pastor. I'm responsible for me, and you're responsible for you. As a stay-at-home parent, as an accountant, as a mental health professional, whatever it is that you do every single day, you are gonna stand before Jesus one day and give account to your life. And you're gonna have to answer the question if you spent your life fighting for your own rights or laying down your rights for a life of sacrifice. When we ask the question, what does love require of me? All of a sudden it takes us in a totally different environment. And that's all I'm suggesting is as you navigate these times and any times in the rest of your life, this question will change everything. So what does this have to do with community? Well, here's the really simple answer. Jesus seems very clearly to have expected from his friends for them to be concerned with a godly life and not just self-preservation. Peter was a stumbling block because he had this idea that Jesus' life and subsequently their life needed to be up and to the right, continually getting better. It's like, we're winning, the religious leaders can't handle us, then we're gonna kick the Romans out, it's gonna be awesome. It's like up and to the right, up and to the right, up and to the right. And Jesus is like, no. It's not what God's called me to do. And the fact that you're encouraging me there, it's acting like a stumbling block to what God's called me to do. Jesus expected his community to be concerned about a godly life more than self-preservation. It means as Jesus followers, our relationships should be places where we get sharpened and challenged, not towards self-preservation, but towards following Jesus. So here's a question I have for you. When you think of your current relationships and the way that advice is given and received. When you think about your current relationships, whether that's your spouse, your family, your kids, your home group, your small group, the three of you that get together for coffee and read the scriptures together and pray together or go for a walk or whatever it is. When you think of your current relationships and the way that advice is given and received, is the theme around self-preservation or self-sacrificing love? Is the theme around self-preservation or self-sacrificing love? When someone's talking about getting a bigger house, it's like, well, will they lend it to you? Will they give you that money? Yeah, go for it. Higher paying job. Well, it's a higher paying job. Absolutely, you should take it. Retire early. Have you got enough in your, yeah, okay, yeah, yes, do it. Well, I don't know if you should speak up. I mean, I get that there's some sketchy things going on, but is that gonna cost you your job? Because you gotta think about food on the table. Or I agree, man. It's been a hard year. Maybe divorce is the way that you should go. Right? Listen, here's the question I'm asking. Is there permission to do the opposite? Is there permission in your closest relationships, your Jesus-following relationships, to ask questions that go against an up and to the right mentality that everything should continually get better and better and happiness should always be the end result, otherwise you're doing it wrong? Is there permission when you're thinking of, remortgaging to get a bigger house, one of your friends say, hey, have you ever actually thought about downsizing or staying in that neighborhood or actually moving to this neighborhood where there seems to be great need? Is there permission, for someone when you're saying I'm never calling that person again? It's like, hey, I know the last time things didn't go so well, but I wonder if you called them again. I know it wasn't easy the last time, but I wonder if you gave them another call. I wonder. Or hey, I know this job actually pays less. Or that job is good, that they've offered you and it kind of came out of the blue. And so it kind of seems like a God thing because doesn't it always seem like God always calls us to bigger jobs with bigger titles, with bigger pay? But is it possible that God's calling you to stay where you are and invest in the relationships? You were just saying last week how God has opened up some amazing doors. Maybe it's it's not a God moment. Or hey, have you ever thought of actually speaking up at the boardroom table? I know your manager's not gonna hear it, or I know you may lose your job because of it, but you know the horrible things that are going on and you will be implicit with it if you don't speak up. Or hey, I think you're giving up too quickly on your marriage. I think you guys need help. I think you need to work through it. But we'll keep you accountable, bud. But is there permission in your relationships to actually ask those difficult questions? In a moment, I'm going to share some ideas on how to foster that kind of relationship and how to take your relationships that you're already in to that level. But I want to share a story with you. This is something that has been a way of life for me for over 2 decades now. And it's something that I've valued so much in my friendships and my Jesus comrades, people that do life with me. And one of those people I've shared with you before is a friend named Stevens. Stevens actually is a pastor. Stevens actually preached here at Lakeside a few times. I got a picture for you. Remember Stevens? He was here before COVID and all that stuff. But anyways, that's Stevens. You remember him. And Stevens and I, we used to actually pastor in Toronto together. We were like comrades. And every Monday night we would get together and have tub time in his hot tub. Sounds kind of, anyways. But we would just sit out in his hot tub, summer, winter, whatever, and we would just chat about life. But there was an openness there where we would always say, you can ask me anything. And we had some real intimate conversations there. We had some real, uncomfortable conversations like, hey, Mark, last time we were together, I noticed you always, speak this way to your wife and it just doesn't come across loving. Or, hey, Stevens, I noticed this and what about this? And, I'm thinking about this. Okay, well, have you thought about this? And what about, we would constantly in a loving way encourage each other, and no question was off the table. He was a big part of me actually coming to Guelph because of the way he would just journey with me and ask questions, and we would listen to the voice of God together. We'd pray together. It was just such a meaningful relationship. And as I took the job here in Guelph, we were still living in Toronto, and I was kind of commuting back and forth. We kind of kept our Monday nights. And in that season, Stevens also started to have kind of a feeling that God was maybe leading him in a different direction. And long story short, Stevens is not a pastor anymore. Nothing bad happened. He just felt a different call. And so I asked Stevens to send me a picture of his new role. So we should have that picture here. Yes. I was like, Stevens is now a Toronto police officer. And I actually asked him for a really tough looking picture. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe some Charlie's Angels, finger gun or something like that. But anyways, didn't get that. I was but anyways, that was it. Very professional of him. But it was this incredible journey where he came to the tub one night. It was just like, hey, I had this conversation. It just sparked some curiosity that God may be leading in this direction. And over the next few months, we just continued to dialogue and ask tough questions. And hey, that'll actually be harder, or the pay won't be as much. Or, you have this amazing job with this church that loves you and you don't have to work a night shift right now. There were all these questions, but we just felt like there was this strong, and he felt this strong call in his life to actually, after 20 years, leave, professional Christian ministry and actually become a pastor on the streets in the form of a Toronto police officer. And it's been an incredible journey, especially, you just imagine, this has been his first year of being a police officer with all the racial tension and then also COVID-19. It's just been such a wild ride, but the amazing thing that kept him going is that he just really felt a strong call from God, with the community of people around him who just heard that as well and encouraged in that direction. So that was a beautiful thing, and that's what happens when this is working right. But I remember so clearly the day when Stevens called me and he'd kind of reached the point where he's like, I'm doing this, I'm applying, I'm leaving my job and I'm going to become a police officer. He's like, I got to call my dad. And I remember, him and I, it was a tough conversation that he knew was coming because in some cultures, being a pastor is kind of looked down upon, right? You tell your family, hey, I'm going to be a pastor. It's like, why? You can't do anything else? What's wrong with you, right? But other cultures, it's being a pastor, it's really prestigious. And so Stevens is from Montreal, but Haitian culture. And so pastors is really looked upon well. And so in a lot of ways, every time Stevens goes back to Montreal, his dad's on the board and he's preaching. It's it's a holiday, but Stevens still has to preach because, his dad makes sure he's preaching. Anytime Stevens would preach in Toronto, his dad and mom would drive into Toronto just to hear him preach. They were so excited that their son was a pastor. They were so proud of their son that he was a pastor. And not only that, but now not only was he leaving being a pastor, but he was going to be a police officer, which is a little bit more dangerous. I don't know if you know this, but being a pastor isn't all that dangerous. You might get a paper cut or something, nothing, radical. And so that was doubly, big for Stevens' parents because a few years earlier, Stevens' only sibling, his brother, had died suddenly and unexpectedly from a pulmonary embolism. So Stevens is now an only child. There's already one set of grandchildren who don't have a father, and he's about to tell his parents, hey, I'm not going to be a pastor. Okay, strike one. I'm actually going to be a police officer. It's what? Like, that's far more dangerous. And so he was nervous. And I remember the day he came home and he's like, I had an amazing conversation with my dad. He's like, my dad just said, it just seems like this is God all over it. And I'm so excited for you. And I remember personally being at Stephen's graduation, and I was sitting a few seats down from Stephen's dad. And I remember when we all stood up and the pride on his face of his son. And it was almost like, whatever you do, son, if you're following God, I'm just so excited for you. And I just thought to myself in that moment, I continue to think about it as a dad with young kids. I'm like, I want to raise my kids in a way where when they're 30 and 40 and they're going through big life decisions, they're excited to come and dialogue with me and tell me, because they know I'll be like that father who's like, if God's calling you, seems like God's in it, and I just get behind them and push. Then I'll just say, but is that gonna cost? Is that gonna be uncomfortable? You're gonna have a smaller house? What about? But I'm just like, it really does seem like God's in this. That is what we're called to in every single relationship in our life. Not to be a stumbling block, but to call people to sacrificial love, the sacrificial love of Jesus. So how do we do this? Is there an app that can help us along the way? I want to suggest to you that any relationship that you're in can start to take on this flavor. And there's two things plus a bonus idea for you to consider. Number one, model it. You have to start somewhere, whether it's your 3 people who grab a coffee and read the scriptures together. Maybe it's your small group and you guys just kind of talk through the questions, but you never have this kind of open, honest, it's always just up and to the right. Sounds great. They'll lend you the money, go for it, right? But you actually no, I want us to be a community of people who sharpen each other to following Jesus. Here's a few ideas. Number one, model it. I had a friend of mine who did this so well. Whenever there was a conversation and everyone's kind of leaning in one direction, he would just so gently just say, can I ask a question? And he'd almost ask permission, because he's going against the grain a little bit. And once they're like, yeah, no, go ahead. He's like, I have this wonderment. So I have a question, I have a wonderment, or I'm a little bit puzzled, and it's just, he had this gentle way. I have a question, a wonderment, I'm puzzled. He would just ask questions. So just modeling, actually asking some of these questions that don't just go about up and to the right. The second one is invite it. Invite this in your relationship. So, when you're making a big decision, you're together with your small group, it's like, what do you guys think of this? Sounds great, pays more, better, whatever it is. It's like, hey guys, what do you think about this job and the impact it's gonna have on my family and the call that God has on my life? Can you guys just push back on me a little bit? Because I wanna make sure that this is actually what God's calling me to do. Invite that posture in the different relationships that you're in. And thirdly, don't forget about your marriage. Okay, those of you that are married, this should be the fabric of your marriage. I remember my pastor, when he would sit down with engaged couples who wanted to get married, this is the one question he would always ask couples when they're trying to figure out, are we a good fit? He's like, how does this person sitting next to you on the couch help you follow Jesus more? How does this, if this person that you want to link arms with for the rest of your life doesn't challenge you in this way, but in fact is a stumbling block, don't even bother. When you're looking for a spouse, look for someone who does this. And if you're in a marriage right now, and you're like, this doesn't represent my marriage, can I suggest to you, we actually are starting the marriage course this week, and it's amazing. It covers this and so much more. It helps you figure out how to communicate and dialogue openly. And those are so critical to be able to having these safe conversations. And so every Wednesday night, 8 p.m., you can actually go on our website. You'll notice our new website, our teams work so hard to update it and actually launch a brand new one this week. But on our website, you can sign up for the marriage course. And it's awesome. My wife and I just did the last semester, and it's just so great at building this openness in the foundation of your marriage. But can I just encourage you, model it, invite it, and don't forget, those of you who are married, this should be happening in your marriage as well. With that said, Daniel, we have a few minutes for Q&A. Should we jump to any questions that maybe came in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for that, for sharing that. A couple questions. First one, we'll start with, is sacrificing more always what God wants for us?
That's a good question. I'd say there also has to be a call in your life. So I'll give an example. Friends of ours, they go to Romania every year, work in an orphanage. Summarize what they do, they hold crying babies, okay? Now, pastors' jobs can be challenging, but crying babies is a whole other level.
Yes.
So if my friends were like, hey, want to come with us to Romania to hold crying babies, I'm over exaggerating it. I could say, well, that's more sacrificing than I'm doing right now, so I probably have to go. Versus actually saying, but is God actually calling me to that? So there actually has to be a call in your life as well. So Jesus sometimes walked into a crowd, healed one person. amongst other sick people and then left. Or there's a time where Jesus is preaching and the crowd's like, we love this. And his disciples are like, all right, preach another one. And Jesus is like, peace. Why? He's like, I've been called to another place. So yes, sacrifice and sacrificial love is key, but there's also figuring out what does God call me to do. There's a great book, sorry, tangent, but
it's okay.
What is it? Gordon T. Smith. Something Gordon T. Smith call.
Okay,
Anyways,
Google
6
it.
questions for discerning your call. Brilliant. It's so easy to read. It's practically a picture book.
Nice.
But it's like key in figuring this out.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think along with that, Mark, the whole idea of what you're talking about, this idea, the more we live a self-sacrificial life, the more we'll actually be able to understand what God is calling us to do in our life. And it kind of feeds itself. It's cool.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, the other question, does self-sacrifice mean that we have to stay in a toxic or abusive relationship?
That's a great, yeah, it's amazing how like the words of Jesus has been used to continue to abuse and oppress people, right?
Yeah.
Like, someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to the other also. So someone who's in an abusive relationship goes to their pastor and the pastor's like, well, Jesus went to the cross for us, so you're just gonna have to take it. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yes, Jesus gave his life, but there's also stories, I think it's John 8, where Jesus is actually about to be stoned by a crowd that's angry at him. And Jesus doesn't actually say, okay, you hit me there, now let me take it here. He actually sneaks out the back door. So if you're in any type of abusive or toxic relationship, call friends or family, call the police, run. But in no way is the call to self-sacrifice a call to stay in an abusive relationship. So that's a great question. And feel free to reach out to the church too for different guidance and resources as well.
For sure, yes. I remember when I was working with students, as we worked through like a recovery program we had called The Landing, I remember we always talked, one of the guidelines in that was when you're in a toxic or abusive relationship especially, to acknowledge that it's not your fault. A lot of times we think, I got myself into this situation, I need to fix this, I should sacrifice more. Yeah. But you are not responsible for other people's actions. Yeah. And sometimes making the best choice means leaving.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Is that all the questions?
That's all the questions we got time for today, Mark.
Well, we're gonna just take some time and actually just sit with this. Like, we wanna live this out, but the reality is Jesus is the reason we live this out. And the song that we're gonna sing, just as as the band sings it, just let these words kind of sit with you. Like, Jesus is the anchor of our heart. He's the reason we live this way. So actually, let's just take some time and have this song, and we'll be back in a moment.
And before you head out today, I just wanted to let you know, lately, some of us, and all of us actually as staff, were sitting around and chatting a bit about moving forwards and where we're going and this crazy world we're in. And we decided it would be a great time to do a survey, to ask our congregation, our church, those who call a Lakeside home and those who are new to Lakeside, what they think about things, to give some input and that sort of stuff, because really, we value you. And don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that you are valuable, that you are deeply loved, and that you belong. And so we want to encourage you to take the opportunity right now to visit our website and go on the top banner. If you're on desktop or if you're on mobile, you click the drop-down menu and you can click the word survey, and it'll only take you a few minutes to fill it out. It is anonymous, confidential. You can choose to put your name in if you want, but you don't have to. And we just really want you to take the opportunity to do that. I know you want to rush off and get that grilled cheese cooking, but sacrificial love takes a few seconds to do a survey. No, I'm just kidding. But we would love you to join and do the survey now or at your earliest convenience. But before you jump off the feet and do that, I'm just going to turn it over to Mark so he can bless you before you head out.
Yeah, and thanks so much. We would so love to get that feedback from you. And feel free it's multiple choice. I feel we should tell people that, because I was always excited when a test was multiple choice. So as you go to do that, I just got these words the moment the song started, and I just wanted to read them for you. It's 2 Corinthians 5:14. And this is a blessing I want to leave you with. For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live, that's us, should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. We live in response to the love of Christ. The love of Christ compels us. May that encourage you this week, friends. Have a fantastic week, and thanks in advance for taking a few minutes, each individual family member, to just pull out your device, go on our website, and fill out that survey. So appreciate it. Thanks, friends.